Multiple devices එකවර connect කළ හැකි internet like a boss. SLT Mobitel Fiber. Multiple devices එකවර connect කළ හැකි internet like a boss. SLT Mobitel Fiber.
Tonight, back to the drawing board. The Supreme Court rules that the SJB's 21st Amendment draft is not consistent with the Constitution. Not playing. Opposition parties walk out of Parliament, citing a lack of solutions to the crisis. Door wide open. Fundamental rights petitions filed to prevent Namika Perera entering Parliament are dismissed. Up and away. Sri Lanka's inflation for the month of May rises to 45.3% with an 18-point NCPI hike. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Tuesday, the 21st of June, 2022.
Lifebuoy shampoo. Loku bodhalen වැඩි ඉතිරියක්.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, you're watching First at 9 with me, David Ebert. Now, the main opposition, Samagi Janava Balabegya, today walked out of Parliament in protest of the lack of solutions to the country's crisis, while accusing the government of failing to deliver essentials as promised. In the meantime, former Minister of Public Security Rear Admiral Sarath Weerasekara warned members of the Tamil National Alliance against not taking the patience and compassion of the Sinhala Buddhist majority for granted when blocking attempts to set up Buddhist shrines in the northern province. He added that the Sinhala Buddhists have allowed minorities to enjoy rights to engage in religious freedom, but any attempts to block the building of Buddhist temples in the northern province could bring about a change. Members of the Samagi Janabalawegya and the National People's Power today announced a boycott of Parliament proceedings for this week and subsequently left the House, citing the inability of Parliament to solve the current economic crisis. Further, the Parliamentary Affairs Committee also decided to cancel 2 of the 4 parliamentary days this week and to convene only today and tomorrow due to the fuel crisis.
මේ ජනාධිපතිවරයා අගමැතිවරයා ප්‍රමුඛ ආණ්ඩුව අසාර්ථකයි. රටේ ජනතාවගේ දැවෙන ප්‍රශ්නවලට කිසිදු විසඳුමක් නැහැ. රටට තියෙන ප්‍රශ්න ඉදිරිපත් කරන ගිරාපෝතක ආණ්ඩුවක් අද තියෙනවා. ගෑස් වලින් හොරා ගන්නවා. ඩොලර් කප්පම් ගන්නවා. අපි ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා ඉන්දියාවට. ඉන්දියන් ක්‍රෙඩිට් ලයින් එකක් අපිට ලබා දීලා තියෙනවා. නමුත් ඒකෙනුත් ඖෂධ ගෙන්නන්නට හොරා කනවා. ක්‍රුක්ස්ලා කොට්ටාසය. කෝ පෝර ටික. කෝ මෙට්‍රික් ටන් 61000 යූරියා ටික. මම කියනවා මේ ආණ්ඩුවට මේක හොර කුපාඩි ආණ්ඩුවක්. ඔලු ගැඩි මාරු කරගෙන ලොකු ලොක්ක වගේ සැප විඳිනවා. අද මේ අපි පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ රැස් වෙනවා. මොකක්ද මේකෙන් ලක්ෂ 220ට තියෙන ඵලය? ඒ නිසා විපක්ෂයේ සියලුම ප්‍රගතිශීලී කණ්ඩායම් තීන්දුවක් අරගෙන තිබෙනවා. මේ රටේ ජනතාවගේ කැක්කුම තේරෙන්නේ නැති මේ ආණ්ඩුව මේ ඇවිල්ලා කරන බොරුවට අපි සම්බන්ධ වෙන්නේ නැහැ. අපි මේ සතියේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුව වර්ජනය කරනවා කියන එක මේ අවස්ථාවේ කියනවා. අපි හිත ගන්නවා මහපාරේ ජනතාවත් එක්ක.
ජනාධිපතිවරයාත් වර්තමාන අග්‍රාමාත්‍යවරයාත් හොර රහසේ අලුත් ආණ්ඩුවක් හදුවා. අර දින 52 කුමන්ත්‍රණය හා සමාන ලෙස දැන් මාසෙකමාරකට ආසන්න කාලයක් ගත වෙමින් තිබෙනවා. ඔහු අරුබුදේ විසඳනවා වෙනුවට ඔහු අරුබුදේ ප්‍රකාශකය. ඛණ්ඩනය දවසයි තෙල් තියෙන්නේ, සති දෙකයි ආහාර තියෙන්නේ, වේල් දෙකක් කණ්ඩ වෙයි, රුපියල් කෝටි ලක්ෂයක් මුදල් ලච්චු ගන්න වෙයි කියලා අරුබුදේ ප්‍රකාශකය බවට පත් වී තිබෙනවා. ඒ නිසා මේ ආණ්ඩුව ඉතා කෙටි කාලයකට න්‍යාය පත්‍රයක් ඉදිරිපත් කළ යුතුයි. අරුබුදෙන් කොට ඒම සඳහා තිබෙන තමන්ට දැක්ම කුමක්ද කියලා. ඒ නිසා විපක්ෂ අපි සියලු දෙනා ගරු කතානායකතුමා තීරණය කරගෙන තිබෙනවා මේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුව මේ සතිය වර්ජනය කළ යුතුයි. ආණ්ඩුවට කාලයක් දෙනවා. කරුණාකරලා මේ
In the meantime, former Minister of Public Security Rear Admiral Sarath Weerasekara issued a strongly worded warning to members of the Tamil National Alliance, who he accused of blocking attempts at the setting up of Buddhist temples in the northern province. In his speech, he warned the TNA that there was a limit to the patience of the Sinhala Buddhists in the country.
අපි දන්නවා අපේ ව්‍යවස්ථාවේ 9 වගන්තිය තියෙනවා බුද්ධ ආගමට ප්‍රමුඛස්ථානය දෙන්න. ඒ වගේම තමයි බුද්ධ ශාසනය ආරක්ෂා කරලා පෝෂණය කරන එක රජයේ වගකීමක් කියලා අපේ ව්‍යවස්ථාවේ සඳහන් වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම තමයි අපි සිංහල බෞද්ධයන් හැටියට අන් ආගම් වලට සියල්ලටම උන්ගේ අයිතිවාසිකම් අපි කඩ කරන්නේ නැතුව උන්ට ඒ අයිතිවාසිකම් ලබා දීලා තියෙනවා. අපේ රටේ අපේ බෞද්ධ රටක් වුණාට අපේ රටේ මොනතරම් හින්දු කෝවිල් තියෙනවද? අපේ රටේ මොනතරම් මුස්ලිම් පල්ලි තියෙනවද? අපේ රටේ මොනතරම් කතෝලික පල්ලි තියෙනවද? නමුත් අපි මෙහෙම කළාට උතුරේ සමහර බෙදුම්වාදී දේශපාලන නායකයෝ උතුරේ බුද්ධ ශාසනයට ඒ අවශ්‍ය කරන ගෞරවය ලබා දෙන්නේ නැහැ. මීට සතියකට පෙර ද්‍රවිඩ සන්ධානයේ මන්ත්‍රීවරුන් දෙදෙනෙක් මුලිතිව් වල කුරුන්දා ශෝක කියන ඓතිහාසික චෛත්‍යයේ ධාතු නිධාන කරන්නට යනකොට මැරයන් පිරිසක් එක ඇවිල්ලා ඒක සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම කඩාකප්පල් කළා. මේ රටේ ප්‍රශ්න හමුවේ ඒකට මුවා වෙලා මේ ද්‍රවිඩ සන්ධානයේ මන්ත්‍රීවරු ශාසනය සහ මහා සංඝරත්නය කර අපහාසය ගැන අපි තදින්ම හිලා දකිනවා කියලා කියන්න ඕනේ. ඒ වගේම තමයි අවසාන වශයෙන් කතානායකතුමනි මේ බෞද්ධ රටේ ද්‍රවිඩ සන්ධානය කියන්නේ ප්‍රභාකරන්ගේ දේශපාලන පක්ෂය. ඒතර ප්‍රභාකරන් සිංහලයන්ව පෙති කපන කොටත් අපි ඒ වගේ ඔවුන්ගේ අයිතිකාරකම් රැක්කනම් තමුන්නාසලා ලැජ්ජ වෙන්න ඕනේ. මේ වගේ අවස්ථාවේ අහිංසකගේ මහානායක හිමිවරු සහ අන්නායක හිමියන් මලක්වත් පූජා කරන්න දෙන්න නැතුව මේ නමුත් අවසාන වශයෙන් කියන්න ඕනේ අපේ සිංහල බෞද්ධයන්ගේ ඉවසීම සහ අනුකම්පාව නිවටකමක් ලෙස බාර ගන්න එපා. ඒ ඉවසීමේ සීමාවක් තියෙන බව දැනගන්න ඕනේ කියන එකත් මේ අවස්ථාවේ කියා සිටිනවා.
Meanwhile, the Supreme Court has determined that some clauses in amendments proposed by the Samaga Jan Balavegya for the 21st Amendment to the Constitution may require a referendum and will need to be passed by a special majority in Parliament. The determination was read out in Parliament today by Speaker Mahinda Yapa. Meanwhile, the 22nd Amendment drafted by Justice Minister Vijayadasa Rajapaksa has been approved by the Cabinet of Ministers before its presentation in Parliament. Speaker of Parliament Mahinda Yapa Abeyewardena read out the Supreme Court's determination on the petition against the constitutional amendments proposed by the Samaga Jan Balavegya during today's parliamentary sessions. The proposed 21st Amendment to the Constitution was introduced by the General Secretary of the Samaga Jan Balavegya, Ranjit Madhuva Bandara, as a private member's motion.
I wish to inform Parliament that I have received the determination of the Supreme Court in respect of the bill titled 21st Amendment to the Constitution.
Accordingly, the Supreme Court has determined that some clauses in the amendments proposed by the Samaga Jan Balavegya for the 21st Amendment may require a referendum and will need to be passed by a special majority in Parliament.
විපක්ෂයෙන් ඉදිරිපත් කරපු 21 වෙනි ආණ්ඩු ක්‍රම ව්‍යවස්ථා සංශෝධනයේ සකරු රංජිත් මද්දුම බණ්ඩාර මැතිතුමා ඉදිරිපත් කළේ ඒ 21 වෙනි සංශෝධනයේ තිබුණා ප්‍රධාන වශයෙන් විෂයන් 8ක් පිළිබඳව සංශෝධන. විධායක ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ බලය අතහැරීම හෝ එම බලය අගමැති ඇතුළු අමාත්‍ය මණ්ඩලයට මාරු කිරීම කියන කාරණය. ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨාධිකරණය පැහැදිලිව කියලා තියෙනවා ස්ථාවට අනනුකූල නිසා ඒක ජනමත විචාරණයකින් අනුමැතිය ලබාගත යුතුයි කියලා. සෑම අවස්ථාවකදීම ජනාධිපතිවරයා විසින් ගනු ලබන සෑම තීන්දුවක්ම අග්‍රාමාත්‍යවරයාගේ උපදෙස් මත පමණක් ගත යුතුයි කියන සංශෝධනය. ඒ සම්බන්ධව ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨාධිකරණයේ පැහැදිලිව කියලා තියෙනවා ජනමත විචාරණයකින් අනුමැතිය ලබාගත යුතුයි කියලා. ජනාධිපතිවරයාගේ නියෝජිතයා නැතුව ව්‍යවස්ථාදායක සභාවක් නිර්මාණය කිරීම එය ජනමත විචාරණයකින් අනුමැතිය ලබාගත යුතුයි කියලා තීන්දුව කරලා තියෙනවා. ජනාධිපතිවරයාට පාර්ලිමේන්තුව විසිරුවීම සඳහා 70 ව්‍යවස්ථාවේ තිබෙන බලතල අහෝසි කරන්න කියලා යෝජනා කරලා තියෙනවා. ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨාධිකරණය එය ජනමත විචාරණයකින් සම්මත වෙන්නේ නැතිව මෙවැනි සංශෝධනයක් කරන්න බෑ කියලා. පළාත් සභා පාලනය සම්පූර්ණයෙන් ජනාධිපතිවරයාගෙන් ඉවත් කරන්න කියන යෝජනාව සම්බන්ධව ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨාධිකරණයේ නිගමනය වන්නේ ජනමත විචාරණයකින් සම්මත කරගත යුතුයි කියලා තිබෙනවා. ජාතික ආරක්ෂක කවුන්සිලය ජනාධිපතිවරයා සහභාගී නොවිය යුතුයි අග්‍රාමාත්‍යවරයාගේ ප්‍රධානත්වයෙන් පමණක් ඒ කළ යුතුයි කියන ප්‍රතිපාදනය ජනමත විචාරණයකින් සම්මත කිරීමකින් තොරව මේ නීතියක් බවට පත් කරන්න බෑ කියලා. ඒක නිසා කරු කතානායකතුමනි විපක්ෂයේ ඉදිරිපත් කරපු පනතේ කිසිදු අගන්තියක් ජනමත විචාරණයකින් තොරව මේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ සම්මත කරන්න බැරි බවට ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨාධිකරණය මේ අවස්ථාවේදී නිගමනයක් දීලා තියෙනවා.
Meanwhile, following his appointment as the Minister of Justice, Dr. Vijayadasa Rajapaksa presented the 22nd Amendment to the Cabinet with the intention of reenacting the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Accordingly, the Cabinet had granted approval at last evening's meeting.
බුද්ධිමත් ජනතාවගේ හඬක් තිබුණා වහාම 22 වෙනි සංශෝධනය ගේන්න කියලා ඊයේ වෙනකොට ඒකට අවශ්‍ය අනුමැතිය ලැබුණා. දැන් ඉතිරි කාර්යය තියෙන්නේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට මම විශ්වාස කරනවා
රටේ ජනතාව කිව්ව විධායක ජනාධිපතිගේ බලතල අඩු කරන්න කියලා. නමුත් 19ට එහා ගිහිල්ලා විධායක ජනාධිපතිගේ බලතල වැඩි කරගෙන තමයි මේක ගෙනල්ලා තියෙන්නේ. හොරෙන් හංගලා ගහන්න හදන. 19 නෑ ජනාධිපතිට ඇමතිකම් ගන්න පුළුවන්. මේ 21 ගෙනාපු එක තියනවලු ඇමතිකම් ගන්න පුළුවන්. 19 නෑ ජනාධිපතිට අගමැති ඉවත් කිරීමේ බලය. ඒක තමයි අධිකරණයෙන් දින 52 තීන්දුව දුන්නේ. මේකේ තියනවලු ජනාධිපතිට අගමැති අස්කිරීමේ බලය තියෙනවා. 19 තියෙන්නේ අගමැතික උපදේශ පරිදි කැබිනට් මණ්ඩලය පත් කරන්න ඕන කියලා. අපේ ආරංචි විදිහට මේකේ තියෙන්නේ ජනාධිපතිත් එක්ක සාකච්ඡා කරලා කියන්නේ ජනාධිපතිට ඕනේ.
The Minister of Agriculture and Cabinet co-spokesperson Mahinda Amravira says that the fertilizer secured from India under a loan is expected to arrive in Sri Lanka on the 6th of July. Speaking at the weekly Cabinet media briefing today, he also said that they expected to provide fertilizer to the country's farmers for the Yala harvest by the 15th of this month. Minister Amravira added that the country will be able to avert a severe food crisis with over 475,000 hectares of land now being cultivated. On the 8th of this month, Minister of Labour and Foreign Employment Manusha Nanekkara presented a proposal to appoint a cabinet subcommittee to look into the possibility of revising the minimum age limit for Sri Lankan women to be employed as domestic workers abroad. The minimum age for a domestic worker to be employed in Saudi Arabia is 25, while it is 23 for other Middle Eastern countries and 21 years for countries in other regions. Following the recommendations of the subcommittee, a decision was taken at the cabinet meeting last evening to amend the minimum age to 21 years in a bid to encourage foreign employment and increase foreign remittances to Sri Lanka.
අපි යෝජනාවක් ඉදිරිපත් කළා විදේශයන්හි සේවානියුක්ත ශ්‍රී ලාංකිකයෝ තමන් ගණදෙනු කරන වාණිජ බැංකුවකට මසකට ඩොලර් 50 බැගින් අවුරුද්දක් මුදල් එව්වුව ඩොලර් 600ක් තැන්පත් වෙනවා ඒ තැනත්තගේ නමට 600 තැන්පත් වෙන අවස්ථාවේදී ඒ වගේ 5 ගුණයක් ඩොලර් 3000ක ණය මුදලක් ඒ පවුලේ උදවියට ලබා දෙන්න වැඩපිළිවෙලක් සකස් කරන්නට කියලා. එයින් අදහස් වෙන්නේ ඩොලර් 600ක් තැන්පත් වශයෙන් බැංකුව හරහා එව්වහම ඒ ශ්‍රමිකයාට ඔවුන්ගේ පවුලට ලක්ෂ 11ක වගේ මුදලක් පොලි රහිත ණයක් ලෙස ලැබෙනවා. ඒක ගෙවන්න තියෙන්නේ අවුරුදු 5කින් ඒත් 50 අවුරුදු 5 ගෙව්වම ඒ ඩොලර් 3000 පිය වෙනවා.
Meanwhile, in order to ensure food security in the country, the cabinet has also decided to lease out lands owned by the Department of Railways for cultivation for a period of 1 year, prioritizing cultivators already engaged in relevant areas, residents near railway tracks and low-income earners. The total extent of the lands belonging to the Railways Department is approximately 14,000 acres, and around 10% of this has been leased for various purposes.
රට පුරා දැවැන්ත වගා සංග්‍රාමයක් ආරම්භ කරන්න අපි කටයුතු කරා. මුල් වෙලාවේ තිබුණේ යලකන්නේ වගා කරන්න සූදානම් වෙලා තිබුණේ හෙක්ටයාර් 2,48,000යි. මට ඉදිරිපත් කර තොරතුරු අනුව මගේ පළවෙනි හමුවේම නිලධාරීන් කිව්වේ 2,75,000කට විතර යන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි. නමුත් අපි මේ බරපතලකම රටේ ජනතාවට කිව්වම ජනතාව ඒ වගකීම බාරගත්තා. ගොවි ජනතාව. මේ වෙනකොට හෙක්ටයාර් 4,75,000කට වැඩි ප්‍රමාණයක් 2,48,000 ඉඳලා 4,75,000කට වැඩි ප්‍රමාණයක් දැන්ටම කුඹුරු වගා කරන්න පටන් ගන්න තියෙනවා. අද වෙනකොට අපිට ඉන්දියාවට ලැබෙන පොහොර වලින් ඕමාන් වල ඉඳලා මෙට්‍රික් ටොන් 65,000ක් ගෙන එන්න කටයුතු කරා. ඒ අය දීලා තිබෙන දිනමක වානුව අනුව ලබන මාසේ 6 වෙනිදා වෙනකොට මේ පොහොර තොගය ලංකාවට එන බව දන්වලා තිබෙනවා. ලබන මාසේ 15 වෙනකොට මේ සෑම පොහොර අවශ්‍ය ගොවියෙකුටම මේවා ලබා දෙන කඩිනම් වැඩපිළිවෙලක් අපි දැන්ටම සාකච්ඡා කරලා සකස් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ නිසා අපිට යන්න තිබුණු දැවැන්ත ආහාර අර්බුදේ යම් මට්ටමකට මිදෙන්න අපිට පුළුවන්කම ලැබුණා.
In the meantime, the National Aquaculture Development Authority of Sri Lanka last year initiated a commercial sea cucumber cultivation project to create breeding centres, expand farms and establish export production villages. With Sri Lanka able to earn significant foreign exchange by exporting sea cucumbers, the cabinet yesterday decided to expand the project by identifying 5,000 acres in Jaffna, Mena, Kilinochchi and Batiklo to establish 100-acre sea cucumber production and export villages and 1-acre sea cucumber cultivation farms on each 100-acre land. In other decisions, according to the Trade Facilitation Agreement of the World Trade Organization, Sri Lanka is obliged to establish and maintain a single window system to submit documents and data required for authorities in participatory trade. A formal plan for the project was prepared in 2018 under the auspices of the World Bank, which was planned to be implemented in 3 phases. The estimated cost of the project is approximately $15 million, and the government is expected to secure the funds from the World Bank and other stakeholders. Last evening, approval was granted for the proposal to implement the proposed single window project. Meanwhile, the Court of Appeal has dismissed the WRIT application filed by MP Johnston Fernando seeking an order preventing the Criminal Investigation Department from arresting him. The WRIT application was called before Appeals Court judges Sobita Rajakaruna and Dhammika Ganiyapula today. Dismissing the WRIT application, the Appeals Court bench ruled that the magistrate has the jurisdiction to issue new orders regarding the former minister who is currently out on bail. The bench further stated that the petitioner failed to surrender to the court voluntarily and that he had made an appearance before the judge only after the court issued a warrant for his arrest. In addition, the Supreme Court has rejected granting leave to proceed with the 5 fundamental rights petitions challenging the appointment of business magnate Dhammika Perera as a Member of Parliament. The petitions were taken up by a 3-judge bench comprising Justices Priyantha Jayawardena, Yasantha Kodagoda and Arjuna Obesekara. Delivering the verdict, Justice Priyantha Jayawardena, who leads the 3-judge bench, said that it would not grant leave to proceed with the petitions pursuant to the decision of the majority of the bench. Earlier this month, several individuals and organizations, including the Centre for Policy Alternatives and its executive director, had filed fundamental rights applications challenging the appointment of Perera to fill the vacancy created by the resignation of former Minister Basil Rajapaksa as a Member of Parliament elected under Article 99A of the Constitution. Later, Perera undertook not to take oaths as a Member of Parliament or a Minister until the Supreme Court decides on granting leave to proceed with the petitions filed before courts against his appointment to Parliament. The Colombo Additional Magistrate today ordered the release of youth activist Anuruddha Bandara, who was arrested on suspicion of publishing various posts and articles on social media in a manner that allegedly caused unrest among the public. President's counsel Salia Piris, who appeared on behalf of the defendant, had earlier stated in court that it is not possible to pursue the relevant charges against his client. Accordingly, the Piris had requested the court to release him from the case. After considering the submissions made by the police and the defense counsel, the Colombo Additional Magistrate Keminda Perera issued his order, stating that the suspect would be released. The social media activist had been arrested by officers of the Colombo North Division Criminal Investigation Unit at his residence on April 2nd and granted bail the same night. And we'll be back with more stories after this short break. Do stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Now, Minister of Health Kelly Rambukwela says that arrangements have been made to dispense fuel to health sector employees every Friday at 74 filling stations island-wide in order to ensure that they are able to report to work. The move comes after the declaration of health sector activities, electricity supply and fuel supply as essential services by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa yesterday. Sri Lanka is expected to receive its next 2 shipments of petrol and diesel on the 23rd and 24th of this month. Until then, the existing fuel stocks are being managed and distributed to prioritize essential services. Further, in a bid to ensure public transportation is not affected by the fuel shortage, filling stations located at Sri Lanka Transport Board depots continue their fuel dispensing to private buses. However, despite warnings given by the government to members of the public not to hoard fuel after siphoning from fuel tanks, some bus operators at fuel queues continued doing so, which has been made a punishable offence. Meanwhile, yesterday, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa issued a Gazette Extraordinary declaring all services connected to the supply of electricity, supply or distribution of petroleum products and fuel as essential services with effect from yesterday. Further, the Gazette also declared all activities related to the health sector as essential services as well. However, minimum fuel availability in the country has inconvenienced employees engaged in essential services in filling up their tanks. With that being the case, the Health Ministry announced certain measures today to ensure that health staff are not affected in having to report to work due to the fuel issue.
සෑම සතියෙම සිකුරාදා දවස පෙට්‍රෝෂන් 74ක් නම් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ 74 සිකුරාදා දවස බවෙන් කරන්නේ සෞඛ්‍ය ක්ෂේත්‍රයේ විශේෂඥ වෛද්‍යවරුන්, වෛද්‍යවරුන්, ආචාර්ය වෛද්‍යවරුන් සිට පහළ අපේ ඉන්න කම්කරුවා දක්වා ඉන්න අයට මූලික අවශ්‍යතාවයක් වෙන තමන්ගේ ඉන්ධන ටික ලබා ගැනීමට ඒ පහසුකම ලබා දෙන්න තියෙනවා. ඒකේ අපි සීමාවන් දාලා තියෙන SU එකකට එහෙම නැත්නම් වාහනයකට ලීටර් 40කුත්, 3 wheeler එකකට ලීටර් 20කුත් මට මතක විදිහට, මෝටර් සයිකල් එකකට ලීටර් 6ක් ප්‍රදාන කරලා දෙනවා. එතන හැබැයි ඒ වෙනසක් කරන්නට අවශ්‍ය නම් ඒ අවශ්‍යතාවයන් වල වෙනසක් ඇති වෙනවා නම් ඒක අපිට සාකච්ඡා කරලා විශ්ල ගන්න පුළුවන්.
The full list of filling stations has been published on our official website www.adaderana.lk. On the country's gas situation, State Gas Supply Litro Gas continued distribution of 37.5 kilogram cylinders, prioritizing essential services. However, domestic gas cylinders were not distributed during the day. Meanwhile, National People's Power parliamentarian Dr. Harini Amarasuriya has urged the government to prioritize the mental health and psychosocial well-being of the country's children during the crisis period, as failure to address them will have long-term consequences, she says. Speaking at a media briefing yesterday, Dr. Amara Surya also blamed the government for lack of preparedness in addressing issues pertaining to children's education during this period.
More or less for the last 2.5 to 3 years, children have not been able to access education as they should. The education process has been severely disrupted. However, the government continues to function. The education system and the examination system continues to function as if none of these disruptions have happened. The recent ordinary level examinations were also conducted, sort of assuming that children who face this exam were able to participate in the education process without disruption. There was no consideration given when setting the paper to the conditions under which the children were able to access education. This is completely unfair and completely contrary to any kind of education principle. This is something that the Ministry of Education, those responsible for education, should have prepared for, because none of this came as a surprise. This is extremely unfair. The question needs to be asked, what right does anyone have to fail a child or to label a child as having failed or underperformed in these kinds of circumstances? The other issue that we want to highlight is also the mental health and psychosocial issues that children in particular are facing. These are not currently priorities for the government, but the priorities of the government continue to be their own efforts to remain in power rather than the impact that this is having on children and on their caregivers. The stressors that this crisis is having on caregivers, on parents, is also affecting the well-being and mental health and psychosocial well-being of children. We know that there have been an increase in reporting of incidents of violence and abuse and domestic violence, and we call upon the authorities, even at this late stage, to set in place systems to prioritize mental health and psychosocial needs as much as other factors, because failure to address these issues will have long-term consequences.
Now, the Information and Communication Technology Agency has been taken to task by the Parliamentary Committee on Public Accounts for its inefficiency in developing effective IT solutions for public sector institutions. The agency was also rapped by the committee on delays in implementing the RAMIS system for the Inland Revenue Department. MP Lasantha Alagiyawanna, during a Committee on Public Accounts meeting, has expressed dissatisfaction with the role of the Information and Communication Technology Agency in the development of the Institutional Integration Computer Program related to the licensing processes of the Department of Imports and Exports. He further stated that ICTA does not provide any intervention or assistance to government institutions, especially those that do not have the knowledge to develop computer programs. He also said that this institution has the responsibility of equipping government institutions with sufficient IT capabilities and integrating them with new technology. COPA recommended that the ICTA submit a report by the 1st of July on the software developed for government agencies, the government agencies that were advised, and their current status. There was also discussion on the inability of the Inland Revenue Department to implement the Revenue Administration Management Information System for tax collection. COPA directed its focus on the use of it by the Department of Import and Export Control and other government institutions that could contribute more towards government revenue. Discussions also focused on ICTA developing and advising on software for other departments and ministries. In addition, projects prepared by ICTA in collaboration with the Sri Lanka Excise Department and the External Resources Department were also taken up for discussion. Meanwhile, the US government today announced a new funding of $5.75 million to help Sri Lanka address the immediate needs of those most affected by the current crisis situation in the country. The funding is to be disbursed through USAID and will support micro-enterprises in communities that traditionally experience high poverty rates. The US government today announced a third tranche of new funding to address the immediate needs of those hardest hit by the current socio-economic crisis in the country. The humanitarian assistance totaling $5.75 million will provide cash assistance, short-term jobs, and agricultural supplies directly to crisis-affected people in the country. The new grant funding through the US Agency for International Development builds on last week's announcement of $6 million in grants and $120 million in new loans through the Development Finance Corporation. US Ambassador to Sri Lanka Julie Chang stated that the recent United Nations appeal to international donors warned of an unfolding multidimensional food security crisis in Sri Lanka, and the new assistance funded through the US government will address some of these complex issues. Ambassador Chang further added that the US is working hard to ensure that these funds directly reach the people who have been affected most by the crisis. The funding will also support micro-enterprises in communities that traditionally experience high poverty rates. In addition, it will also provide assistance for community-based disaster management committees to help to prepare, to respond and ultimately recover from crises. Meanwhile, according to the US Embassy, it also plans to add significant ongoing investments and assistance projects in Sri Lanka, which will help the people meet their immediate and long-term needs. Sri Lankan stocks reversed their downtrend and gained for the first time in 6 sessions, closing stronger today, although turnover hit a 16-month low amid political and economic concerns. The main all-share price index closed 1% or 77.7 points higher at 7,502.28, gaining from its near 8-week low. The Tuesday's turnover recorded a 16-month low of 760 million rupees, its lowest since March 22nd. The more liquid S&P SL20 index gained 1.51% or 35.65 points to end at 2,400.57 points. Foreign investors sold a net 9.5 million rupees worth of shares today. The market witnessed a total foreign outflow of more than 1 billion rupees so far this year. Further, the market has so far lost 7.3% in June, after gaining 6% in May, and it lost 23% in April, followed by 14.5% in March. The overall rate of inflation, as measured by the National Consumer Price Index on a year-on-year basis, is 45.3% in May 2022, according to Sri Lanka's Department of Census and Statistics. The Department of Census and Statistics today released the National Consumer Price Index and the inflation rate for the month of May 2022. The NCPI for all items for the month of May 2022 has been recorded at 208.7, and it records an increase of 18.4 in index points compared to April 2022. The overall rate of inflation, as measured by the NCPI on a year-on-year basis, has increased to 45.3% in May from 33.8% in April. The moving average inflation for the month of May 2022 is 16.3%. Core inflation increased to 37.7% in May from 27.9% in April 2022, and the general price level has increased by 108.7% compared to the base year of 2013. Year-on-year food inflation was recorded at 58%, while year-on-year non-food inflation was 34.2%. Now, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine marking its 118th day, fierce fighting continued across several regions as the strategic struggle in the Russia-Ukraine conflict intensifies, with both sides being accused of hitting targets as missile strikes inflict significant damage. Meanwhile, Russia has promised to respond in kind to a Lithuanian ban on the transport of goods from Russia to Kaliningrad that it says will affect the Lithuanian population. According to Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister, decisive battles are continuing in the strategic city of Severodonetsk in Luhansk, leading to widespread damage to buildings around the crucial Azot chemical plant. In a national television address, he stated that pro-Russian forces are stepping up their attacks as they attempt to reach the borders of Luhansk. The defense minister added that Ukrainian troops are doing everything possible to hold their territory. However, according to the head of the Severodonetsk district military administration, Russian troops have captured the frontline village of Toshkivka in the Donbas region as they keep trying to seize the strategic city of Severodonetsk. He also told foreign media that the village had not been under Ukrainian control since yesterday. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials have reported an uptick in Russian shelling around the northeastern city of Kharkiv in the past 24 hours as the evacuation of people from the territories occupied by Russian forces continued. Fighting ensued as 993 people, including 254 children, were evacuated from the temporarily occupied territories in the Kharkiv region. Further, according to Reuters reports, there have been several explosions in the southern Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv, followed by missile attacks yesterday. Meanwhile, Lithuania has shut a rail corridor from Russia to its Kaliningrad exclave for certain basic goods, including construction materials, metals and coal, in response to new EU sanctions that came into force on Saturday. In this backdrop, Moscow's Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev says that it will respond shortly to Lithuania's ban of goods transiting from mainland Russia to its exclave. Patrushev added that the countermeasures would have a serious negative effect on the Lithuanian population. And that's all we have for you tonight. We hope you join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.